I knew you couldn't get enough of our sexy content. Let's have a quickie.
Hey guys, I'm here to do a quickie about Mariah a little bit. On the last show that we did with Mariah, she talked about when we did the podcast party. That is my 100 sign that she was talking about. So I was kind of proud of that. I thought I'd throw that up there today. But anyways, what I wanted to talk about was BDSM. So I am what I consider to be an experienced Dom. And so I thought maybe I could talk about some advice for maybe somebody who's like looking for a Dom, or maybe wants to be a Dom. So for me personally, I don't look for a sub. If I enter into a relationship with somebody and it turns out that they are like, you know, already a sub or have curiosities about being a sub, I will kind of tease that out and see what it's all about. I don't necessarily go looking for subs. I don't want to disparage anybody who does that by any means, but my experience has been that if you just go looking for a sub, there's probably going to be a little bit of chaos or some confusion. So I just kind of let it happen organically, kind of naturally. Which would be like, that's my first big piece of advice is like, if you're going to get into a Dom sub relationship, just kind of let it happen. Don't necessarily go out looking for it. And it's kind of like how I met Jamie. So Jamie is not a sub, but I wasn't looking when I found her. I was just kind of like, see what's out there. And I had like a dating profile, but it wasn't like, I wasn't taking it seriously. That would be my first big piece of advice is like, I would say that my experience has been that like, if you go to a site specifically looking for a sub, you might have some less than desirable experiences. So number one, if you are wanting to be a Dom, you have to understand your limitations first. There are Dom sub relationships that go from mild to wild, and it can your feelings matter too. As the Dom, you have a right to say no, that's too much. I'm not doing that, or you're not comfortable with that. That's perfectly okay. For instance, one of my limitations is I won't do anything with scat or fecal matter. I have zero interest in that, and I think if it made an appearance in that situation, it would probably ruin the experience for me. So that's one of my limitations. So make sure that you understand your limitations first. I think that's super important. And then I know that sometimes that like talking about it can sort of steal that magic, like everybody always kind of like fantasizes that movie style, like consensual sex scene where it's just like, oh, we want each other so bad and we're just getting right into it. But having a serious conversation, if you're going to get involved in BDSM type activities with somebody is really important. And you need to have a plan in place for signals and aftercare. It doesn't matter how good you are at spanking somebody or using flogging somebody or using a riding crop or whatever it is. It doesn't matter how good you are at that. You can do some serious harm to people if you don't have a really good aftercare plan in place and an understanding of the signals as to like when that is supposed to start. If and it's happened to me, if you have a sub who maybe the evening started out with them wanting to play, wanting to have a scene. But all of a sudden in the middle of the scene, something breaks or they all of a sudden they can't handle it, or maybe emotions come up that they weren't prepared for and they stop the scene. It's now your job to take care of that person and follow all the steps of the aftercare. And all those steps are things that you're going to have to understand aftercare. You're going to have to do research on it. And then you're going to have to talk to your sub. Your sub is going to have to tell you, like, hey, after a scene, this is what I need. And be mindful. I think this is something that gets forgotten a lot, is that the sub is really the one who's in charge. I think it was Dr. Laurie Bennett Cook, when she came and she kind of talked about it, and she explained it as like a buffet. The sub gets to say that I like these things and I like a little bit of this, but I don't want any food from over there. And so as a dom, it's your responsibility to sort of like assemble a plate for them and bring it to them and serve that up. And I think that's a really good kind of an analogy for it. It is also your job as a dom, and this is like super serious. You don't cross lines. You don't pressure for things that you want. You can push boundaries respectfully if you've been asked to do that, but you don't get to make decisions for the sub. The sub is the one who's relinquished their control for this moment to you, and because they trust you. And I'll tell you straight up, I have interacted with subs that have been, for lack of a better word, abused by their doms. And it is, it can be traumatizing to people if this stuff is not taken seriously. So you got to follow all the rules. Everything has to be consensual. My favorite kind of subs, I love brats. What I really like about it is it's a good temperature gauge. The brattier my subs are, the harder I go. And when all of a sudden they become less bratty, we have an understanding. I also would recommend, I think one of the things that I really enjoyed about it was like making a day out of it almost. It's not just all of a sudden, you put on your uniform and you go, spanking or whatever it is that you're doing. I had a sub one day who texted me and she's like, hey, I'm kind of, feeling frisky. And I was like, cool. So, what are we going to do about this? And so she was a bratty sub, which I love. And she started talking shit right there on the cell phone. And she was texting me being just a little shit. And I said, all right, yeah, go ahead. Keep talking shit. I'm cool with it. And all day. And so I was texting her back and forth, and she'd talk back and I'd give her commands and she'd talk back, and then I'd warn her. And then I stopped at the hardware store on the way home and picked out some particular things that I needed for what she had been looking to kind of play with. And every time I put an item in the cart, I'd send her a picture. And by the time I got home, it was fucking what a night. Yeah. I'm gonna get lost in reminiscing if I think about that for too long. So the other thing too I would recommend is a uniform. I had a black dress shirt with a plain black t-shirt underneath. I would wear cuffs on my wrists, and usually jeans with an easy to open belt, and no underwear. And boots, like combat boots. And it almost became like Pavlovian. I would put those boots on and or that uniform on. And the other thing too, I would definitely recommend, don't have dogs around. Dogs will, if they think something's unfair, they might come after you. I've had that happen. But number one, if you're going to be a dom, you really got to take it seriously. You got to do the research. You got to understand all the rules. And then you really need to treat every single one of your subs with the respect that they deserve. It is super important. It can definitely be traumatizing to subs that have not had the rules followed. And if you're dealing with someone who this is their first time in a relationship like this, it is definitely worth it for you to take your time and kind of creep into that. Because it can have a lasting and sort of like jarring effect if you do the wrong things, or maybe go too fast, or whatever. I mean, like, I mean, in some of my dom sub relationships, penetration really was like, yeah, I mean, like, it was probably going to happen because I enjoyed that, but it was like one of the last things, the period on the end of a sentence, basically. So make sure that you understand what your sub is really looking for, what they're trying to experience. In my experience, some subs are working through some kind of a trauma, and this is a good opportunity for them to feel safe in that place and kind of process a little better, and some aren't. Make sure you understand where you're at, because if you are dealing with a sub who is maybe working through some trauma and using this as an expressive outlet for that trauma, be aware of that, because you could trigger them. And PTSD is like a real thing, right? So yeah, be really careful with that. And like I said, if you're dealing with someone who's never really worked into this, take your time, really, like, kind of work into it, baby steps. Suddenly being a little too rough could ruin it for somebody. And then be mindful of safe words and safe signals, because sometimes they can't talk, which is kind of fun. But understand that, set up protocols so that, hey, if you can't talk, I need a signal. And I like sort of like red light, yellow light, green light. Obviously, red would be stop. If someone were to say the word red in the middle of a scene, I would completely stop what we were doing and immediately go into aftercare. Yellow means, okay, I like it, but kind of reaching some limits here. So that's maybe a good time to kind of pull back a little bit, maybe just a tiny bit, or maintain. And then, of course, to me, with a Brady sub, green light, they keep talking shit, go ahead. It is kind of fun and interesting too when you can make a face to a sub and they just sort of like, whoa. And you can see it's not just like an emotional response where they're like, ooh, he's being naughty. It's like a physical response, and they're like, oh yeah. That's pretty fun. Be really careful with how you hit people. If you're going to be using striking techniques of any kind, be mindful that this can you are hurting people in the sense that they walk away with bruises and things like that. And then, of course, be very careful with like tying people up, using ropes. You don't want to strangle anybody. Make sure you're using safety protocols and you have plans in place for dangerous things. And then number one is like, seriously, have really good conversations. I can't remember the name of that show, that movie, whatever it was with that dude, but guys, that movie's cute, but there's nothing real about that. I really think that you've got to do some serious research. What the fuck is that show called? Anyway, this was popular. I think they made 3 movies of it or something. But yeah, I remember just like watching it. I was like, fuck this guy. And like, in fact, I remember watching it with a sub, and she was like, that guy's a bitch. Fuck that guy. And I was like, yeah, right. So make sure you do some serious research, talk to people in the community, talk to experienced people. And one thing that I would recommend, and one thing that I did, was I tried to experience as much as I was willing to do to other people apart from penetration, because I can't handle it at all. But I've been, if I'm willing to use a riding crop, I've been hit with a riding crop. I can't remember what it's called, but I use it to flog people. I've been tied up. I've been suspended, those kinds of things. I'm aware of what it's going to do to me, which makes it a little bit easier to understand how it's going to impact my sub. So those are some of my big tips. If you have any questions, saltysexcast.com, right? Yeah. saltysexcast@gmail.com as well. I'd be happy to answer any other questions or even make this like an ongoing thing where I could come up with continued topics on BDSM. Yeah, love you guys. Appreciate you listening in, and I hope you have a wonderful New Year as it's coming up.
Thanks for the quickie. See you next week.